March 1954. In a remote valley in northwestern Vietnam, a French colonel stood in front of the operations map and made a promise to his superiors. A promise that would cost him his life within days. His artillery would crush every Vietnamese gun before they could fire more than a handful of shells. Less than a week later, he took his own life with a grenade inside his own command bunker. That's just one of dozens of breathless moments that almost nobody has ever heard told in full. The story of the battle that ended a colonial empire. In this first episode of the series, I'm going to walk you through, hour by hour, day by day, the 56 days and nights that changed the course of world history. There are tears in this story, there's bitter, ironic laughter, and there's a logistics secret so small, so unassuming, that not even France's brightest military minds ever saw it coming. Stay until the very end, because the moment the victory flag goes up over that command bunker will give you chills. A dying empire's last big gamble. Late 1953, France had been bogged down in Indochina for nearly 8 years, burning through billions of francs and burying tens of thousands of its own soldiers in a war that seemed to have no way out. Back in Paris, people had started calling it the Dirty War, the kind of conflict no politician wanted to be seen publicly defending anymore. General Navarre, commander-in-chief of French forces in Indochina, needed a win. Not a small one, a victory big enough to force Vietnam to the negotiating table on France's terms. He picked Dien Bien Phu, a valley 18 kilometers long and 6 to 8 kilometers wide, buried deep in the mountains of the northwest, more than 300 kilometers from Hanoi. On November 20th, 1953, thousands of French paratroopers dropped into the valley and built 49 defensive strongpoints, each one named after a woman: Beatrice, Gabrielle, Isabelle, Anne-Marie. As if this were some genteel parlor game between gentlemen, not a fight to the death. Navarre's logic looked airtight on paper. Dien Bien Phu was so remote, so mountainous, that there was no way the Vietnamese army could ever drag heavy artillery in, and if they were foolish enough to attack a heavily fortified position, resupplied constantly by air, French firepower would crush their entire main force in one decisive battle, ending the war for good. Navarre's artillery commander, Colonel Charles Piroth, who had lost an arm in World War II, was confident to the point of arrogance. In a press briefing with foreign journalists, he flatly declared that even if the Vietnamese had any artillery at all, French guns would spot and silence it within hours of it firing a single shot. What he didn't know was that on the other side of those mountains, something was quietly happening that no one in the French High Command could have possibly imagined. An impossible logistics problem and an answer that came from bicycles. General Vo Nguyen Giap understood the stakes clearly. To surround and crush Dien Bien Phu, he needed to move tens of thousands of troops, hundreds of artillery pieces, and tens of thousands of tons of ammunition and food across the very mountains the French believed were impassable. Heavy guns had to be disassembled piece by piece, then dragged, pushed, and carried by thousands of hands up sheer cliff faces and through dense jungle, most of it done at night to avoid French reconnaissance planes. But the hardest problem wasn't the artillery. It was feeding and supplying more than 87,000 people at the front, 500 to 600 kilometers from the rear, over terrain where even trucks couldn't make the full journey. Rice alone required over 16,000 tons. And the answer to that massive logistics puzzle, honestly, the first time I read this detail, I had to stop and reread it because I couldn't quite believe it, turned out to be bicycles. It sounds almost like a joke history is playing on us, but this is a documented, verified fact. Bicycles at the time were a luxury item in Vietnam, mostly French-made Peugeots, owned only by families wealthy enough to afford them. And yet, when the call went out, thousands of families across Viet Bac, Thanh Hoa, and Phu Tho gave up their bicycles, sometimes their family's single most valuable possession, for the campaign. Nearly 21,000 of them were mobilized. The porters transformed these bicycles into something no transport engineer on Earth had ever designed. They lashed a bamboo pole to the handlebars as an extra grip so the bike could be pushed on foot without anyone needing to pedal, tied another bamboo pole about 50 centimeters above the seat for balance, reinforced the frame with welded iron, and wrapped old cloth and worn-out inner tubes around the tires to keep them from shredding on the rocky trails. The results are numbers that still stop people in their tracks. A porter named Ma Van Thang from Phu Tho set a record by hauling 325 kilograms of cargo on a single bicycle in one trip, 13 times what one man could carry on his back. Trinh Ngoc from Tan Hoa broke that record with 345 kilograms. Picture that for a second. That's the weight of 4 or 5 grown adults, all loaded onto a bicycle with no engine, pushed on foot for hundreds of kilometers through the jungle, under bombardment, by men who, in the words of one surviving porter, never ate quite enough and slept on plastic sheets spread over bare ground. French journalist Jules Roy, who later wrote an entire book about this battle, was forced to admit a bitter truth. General Navarre lost the battle because of bicycles carrying 200 to 320 kilograms of supplies. French planes dropped hundreds of tons of bombs on those supply routes and never once managed to cut them off. And here's maybe the most ironic detail of all. The very bicycles France manufactured and shipped to Vietnam to serve its colonial upper class ended up coming back to stab that same empire in the heart. Gentlemen, it's tomorrow, 5 p.m. On the night of March 12th, at the Dien Bien Phu command post, Colonel de Castries, the garrison's commanding officer, a cavalry aristocrat with an unmistakably refined bearing, gathered his senior officers. He said one short sentence, almost casually, "Gentlemen, it's tomorrow, 5 p.m. No one in the room knew exactly what was coming, but everyone could feel it. This was the beginning of something enormous. At 5 p.m. on March 13, 1954, exactly as de Castries had said, Vietnamese artillery opened up all at once on the Him Lam stronghold, known to the French as Beatrice, in the northeast. This was the exact moment Colonel Piroth's arrogant promise came crashing down. Vietnamese guns, camouflaged so thoroughly that French reconnaissance planes never spotted them, landed shockingly precise strikes on French positions. Beatrice fell before the first night was over. Perroth, the man who had sworn his artillery would make the enemy's guns shut up within hours, now faced an undeniable truth. He had completely misjudged his opponent. Consumed by shame, he pulled the pin on a grenade and ended his own life inside his command bunker, just days after his confident declaration to the world's press. This is one of those moments that, every time I revisit it, still gives me a chill, not because of the violence, but because of how mercilessly war punishes arrogance. You make a bold public promise, and only days later that very promise becomes the death sentence for your own honor. The next day, Vietnamese artillery destroyed the base's only airstrip. Aerial resupply, the entire foundation of Navarre's strategy, was now reduced to a single option: parachute drops. And even that quickly became a nightmare, because as the valley shrank under Vietnamese fire, planes were forced onto one single approach path, turning them into easy targets. 54 days on instant coffee and cigarettes from here. The siege entered its most brutal, grinding phase. The Vietnamese army shifted to a strategy of steady attack, steady advance, digging trenches to tighten the noose around each stronghold one at a time, instead of committing everything to a single all-out assault as originally considered. This was the decision General Giap himself later called the hardest of his entire military career, scrapping the entire attack plan the night before it was set to launch, choosing the safer, surer path, even though it meant the campaign would take far longer. At Hill A1 alone, a strategic hilltop controlling the entire northeastern sector, fighting raged for 36 continuous days and nights, claiming the lives of 2,516 Vietnamese soldiers, before the hill finally fell on the night of May 6th, just one day before all of Dien Bien Phu collapsed. Meanwhile, inside what remained of the French positions, the situation had turned to despair. The monsoon rains arrived midway through the campaign and turned the trenches into bottomless mud pits. French soldiers, many of whom had survived 54 days on nothing but instant coffee and cigarettes, sank into what one historian later described as a catatonic state of exhaustion. There's one detail that's both funny and heartbreaking at the same time. When Paris parachuted into Castries' new General Stars, along with a bottle of champagne to celebrate his promotion in the middle of the siege, the entire package landed squarely in Vietnamese-controlled territory. By early May, the Vietnamese army had to call in reinforcements from Laos just to muster enough strength for the final all-out assault. 5:50 p.m., May 7th. By 10 a.m. on the morning of May 7, 1954, every surviving officer in the French command bunker understood nothing could save the situation now. French artillery had been completely silenced. The defensive perimeter had shrunk to the size of a small stadium. That afternoon, General Cogny, the Castries' superior in Hanoi, 350 kilometers away, got him on the radio. Their final exchange was later recorded almost word for word. Cogny ordered de Castries not to surrender, not to raise a white flag, even knowing the base was about to be overrun. De Castries replied simply, almost calmly, "Yes, sir." A pause. Then Cogny said his goodbye. "Farewell, old friend. See you soon." A few minutes later, de Castries' radio operator smashed his own transmitter with the butt of his pistol, and the last words to come out of the command bunker before it went silent were, "We're blowing up everything around here. Goodbye." At 5:15 p.m., a unit from Division 312 closed in on the central command post. Company Commander Ta Quoc Luat, along with 4 soldiers, Hoang Dang Vinh, Bui Van Ho, Nguyen Van Lam, and Dao Van Hue, stormed straight into the bunker to take General de Castries prisoner. One of the young soldiers present in that moment, just 20 years old, on his very first day of real combat, later admitted that he himself was shaking as he pointed his rifle at the tall French general standing in front of him. He shouted, "Hands up," and pressed his gun into the man's side. De Castries blurted out a rapid stream of French, words the young soldier only later learned meant, "Please don't shoot, I surrender." That young soldier, like tens of thousands of his comrades, had traveled from sheer terror on his first day in battle to standing face to face with, and personally capturing, the very general who had once been so certain his fortress was untouchable. There's something deeply human in that detail, not some fearless superhero, but a young man, shaking, who still stepped forward anyway, exactly like thousands of others had done throughout those 56 days and nights. At 5:30 p.m., the determined to fight, determined to win flag of the Vietnamese army was raised over the command bunker, a spot that just minutes earlier had been the power center of an entire colonial empire in Indochina. The price of victory. Even today, casualty figures from this battle remain one of the most disputed points between different historical sources. Vietnam's official count puts its own losses at around 4,020 killed and over 9,000 wounded. French and some Western historians put Vietnamese casualties far higher. Some estimates run as high as nearly 23,000 out of a total force of roughly 50,000. The gap is wide enough that one Western historian has written that, even as of 2018, Hanoi had still not credibly enumerated its own losses. So the fairest way to state it is this: the real number remains disputed, with each side presenting a very different picture. On the French side, nearly 2,200 soldiers were killed and almost 11,000 taken prisoner. But the most heartbreaking chapter of this story happened after the guns fell silent. Those prisoners were forced to march more than 300 kilometers on foot to prison camps in the north, exhausted and starving. Of that group, only about 3,300 survived to make it home. If I had to pick just one image from this entire episode for you to remember, it wouldn't be the flag going up. It would be a 20-year-old soldier, shaking but still stepping forward, and tens of thousands of porters pushing bicycles, loaded with nearly 350 kilograms of cargo, mile after mile through the jungle, while bombs fell on them every single day. This victory didn't come from some miracle. It came from the almost unbelievable endurance of ordinary people. One era ends, another begins. Those 56 days and nights weren't just a military victory. The day after Dien Bien Phu fell, the Geneva Conference opened, and by July of that year, the world's major powers were forced to sign an agreement ending nearly a century of French colonial rule in Indochina, something that, just months earlier, almost no Western statesman believed could happen this fast. But this was only the opening chapter, because at that very same conference, the country was split at the 17th parallel, and just over a decade later, another superpower, this time the United States, would set foot on this exact same soil, carrying the very same arrogant belief the French once held, that superior technology and firepower would always decide who wins. They would soon discover, just as Colonel Piroth once did, that history has a way of punishing overconfidence in ways nobody sees coming. So there you have it, the 56 days and nights that ended an empire. From Colonel Piroth's arrogant promise and tragic downfall to de Castries' chillingly calm words, tomorrow, 5 p.m., to the almost unbelievable story of Peugeot bicycles that quietly decided the outcome of an entire battlefield. Every time I tell this story, I still get chills at the image of that 20-year-old soldier, shaking, pointing his rifle at a towering French general. Because that, to me, is the real face of victory, not the glossy numbers in a history book. Which detail in this episode hit you hardest? Colonel Piroth's downfall, or the story of the bicycle that carried 345 kilograms? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next episode in this series on the battles that brought down two superpowers. Because in episode 2, we're leaving the mountains of Dien Bien behind for a different valley, where a new superpower entered the war, and where, for the first time in military history, helicopters were used to airlift troops on a scale never seen before. I'll see you at the Battle of Ia Drang.